If I may call the meeting to order, please. Are there other board members who are still here? Or?
They're just
Inside eating lunch, still chewing.
Ask Doreen a question quick.
That was well done.
Good food today for whatever answer you want.
Just want my budget cut. Okay, thank you very much. I guess first question is public comments. Do we have any speakers?
No speakers.
Okay. Can I ask for a motion on the approval of minutes, please? Second? In favor? Aye. Thank you. Committee work plan, Linda?
There are no changes to the committee work plan.
Are there any questions on it? Okay. Linda, you're going to speak to the
Yes.
commitments completions. Thank you.
Yes, so you'll notice that you do not have a commitments completion report in front of you. No last-minute booklet to look at. And there won't be a formal commitment completion report until we have approval of the 10 to 14 program. However, that doesn't mean that there's not work that's going on, and we won't be telling you about it at these meetings. In fact, as you know from our wrap-up meeting of last month, the 0509 program still has about $2.5 billion worth of commitments that will happen as the year progresses. This is for the core program, largely made up of about $1.6 billion for New York City Transit. As you remember last month, we told you that 1.6 is predominantly two large contracts, one for Flushing CBTC and one for the Clara Hale Depot. Of the commitments that will continue for 0509, so far in January, only about $17 million has actually been committed. This is partly because we're taking a fresh look at work that remains to be committed in 0509 and putting it through the same kind of best value analysis we've been talking to you about. So evaluating whether, in fact, a capital investment is the best way to gain the benefit that's being sought, as well as evaluating whether the budget for the project, in fact, is as cost-effective as it can be to achieve the benefit. So as projects go through that analysis and provide us that information, then we are approving them for commitment. So we'll be reporting on those as they come through. In completions, we forecast to complete in 10 about $3.75 billion worth of projects. That's pretty much in line with annual completions. There were no what we call major projects that were forecast for January. The list that we put out typically is major projects, although we did complete over $100 million worth of work, so in smaller type projects. And that's the report.
Any questions? Okay. I think we have three meaty topics today in addition to the independent engineer report. The first one is on our stations program where Tom has been working with his team, in particular looking at stations, and I think it's timely, even though we probably don't have all the answers, but it's timely for a discussion of this, and I think Fred and Craig will be doing that. We also have, I've asked the independent engineer to be here and to have a discussion of the system on contractor evaluations, and we have need for an executive session at the end of this. So we'll just have to be expeditious in time, but I think all of them are consistent with the idea of trying to get on the table now meatier topics for us to be talking about at the committee, give ourselves an ability to be able to engage in, and I think it's intended in that mindset. So Tom, we'll start with you guys if we can.
Sure. For those of you that attended the New York City Transit MTA Bus Committee meeting this morning, you got a little bit of a prelude to this presentation because there was an article today in the Daily News regarding how we're going to approach stations from a maintenance standpoint to try to improve that element of the customer environment. Billions of dollars in the history of the capital program at the MTA have been spent on our stations. Since the first program in 1980 through the current program, there have been a number of stations that have received, whether they be called a modernization early in the program, which was an out-of-face reconstruction of the entire station, through rehabilitations and renewals and upgrades. And each one of those names had a different scope and a different meaning. Unfortunately, I think many people would say that if you take a look at the billions of dollars that were spent in stations and compare it to the billions of dollars that were spent on cars or on track, and you ask the average customer who uses the system every day and used the system through that period of improvements being made, they would demonstrably say they could see the differences in terms of cars and in track. Much better service delivery in terms of track, no slow speed orders, much smoother ride. And the car environment obviously was one in which we first removed graffiti, but then had much greater MDBF on the car performance, which then again translated better air conditioning performance in the fleet and a more reliable on-time performance. But when you would ask people, what they thought about stations outside of the immediate impact that they saw on those stations when the improvements were made, over a period of time they would probably say they felt that those improvements waned in terms of the impact on them because we didn't stay on top of cleanliness or day-to-day maintenance of removal, replacement of light fixtures when they're broken tiles, escalators, things of that nature. And so we're constantly left with at least one half of the customer experience where I think the customer is saying that after all that money being spent, we need to do something to improve it. Now, there's some conscious decisions made on the car side, for example, that not only do we replace half the fleet and overhaul it and stay on a replacement cycle, but we instituted in the operating budget a scheduled maintenance system program where, on a programmatic basis, we are renewing and replacing elements of the cars so we can keep them in a state of good repair and performing very well. We did similar things in track with respect to putting things on a programmatic cycle. And yet in stations, we did not do it to the same degree, either breadth or depth. So what we're looking at now is, as we enter into the fifth or sixth program that we're going to be going down the path on, and I forget the number, I think it is 5 or 6, is that a dwindling supply of dollars, we just can't throw money and resources at these efforts to try to move the needle up the scale. We need to discriminately take a look at where can we apply those resources to have the biggest bang for the buck. It goes without saying that the critical safety items in a station, any part of the system, have to get dealt with, and that's a responsibility we have. There are things done in the capital program and the operating budget that you don't even, we don't even explain to you, but we know we have a responsibility to take care of, and we do that. But for those elements where it's not safety or reliability, it has to do more with aesthetics, it has to do with more with the environment, it's important that we're targeting the expenditure of those monies, not only on the capital side, but how we're going to support it from an operating side, much like an SMS program for cars, but do something similar for stations, so that people will walk into a station after it's seen some level of improvement in the capital program side, 6 months, a year, 18 months from now, and say, this is one of the stations that got touched, and it's in a better position. So what I've asked Fred and Craig to do in terms of the presentation today is tailor it toward that theme and that objective, so that you can see how we're going to try to apply those resources in the best fashion.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. As Tom said, Craig Stewart and I both will jointly give the presentation. And the significance of that is that going forward, we clearly see that to keep pace with the station needs, it's got to be a dovetailed approach between both capital expenditures and the maintenance resources as well. So what I'll be doing is going through the previous rehab strategy, our strategy going forward, which now will be based on needs, the specific new approaches that we're going to put forth and pilot that will need to be evaluated and assessed, and most importantly, the piece that Craig will cover, which is how we will actually integrate the maintenance program with the capital work. For the last 3 capital programs, there's no doubt that our mission has been to improve conditions in our stations. However, if you look at the graph, you can see that the cost to do that has grown significantly, far outpacing inflation. And that our original goal, which was to get through the universe of all our 468 stations over the period of 35 years, has turned out to be unattainable. The funding envelope limits us. to the total number of stations we can handle, and we're just not meeting that goal. In addition, as we sit here today, we have made investments in 222 of our stations, but that's less than half. And therefore, at the current pace, it would take us 60 to 70 years to get around to each of the stations at least once. And we don't find that acceptable, and I don't think our customers and the community find that acceptable either. And with the investments that we've made in those stations, you can still go there and find specific components that have fallen out of a state of good repair since that initial investment. So in preparation for the 10 to 14 program development, we took a step back and decided that we needed to come up with a different strategy. And to do that, we wanted a more quantitative baseline to begin that. So we basically undertook a condition assessment of the universe of stations, where we sent out teams to basically evaluate or assess the conditions or the components in the stations and assess their condition using a numerical scale. And in this case, it's very similar to the one that's used by DOT for bridge inspections throughout the state, with a rating of 1 to 5. 1 being relatively new, or nothing that you would notice. 2 being minor, or wear and tear that you would expect over the life. And 3, 4, and 5, where you would start to see visually the deterioration of the components. 4 being to the point where you would need to address it. 5, where it could actually reach a point where it was no longer functioning as it was originally intended. So 4s and 5s would be the most critical. We've done that so that we have now a database to work with. That condition assessment gave us a working database with over 14,000 components, over 80,000 subcomponents, to weigh then equally on a level playing field across all stations, and give us now the opportunity to actually prioritize work based on the extent of worn conditions, or 3s, 4s, and 5s at all stations, and be able to compare and prioritize across them. But it also gives us an opportunity to focus on individual station elements or components. This committee spent a number of meetings last year talking about one of the station elements, which was flooring. And we got into the discussion of the need to further analyze that component, looking at maintenance practices and maintenance costs and the useful life of that component. We need to do that on other station elements in addition to the flooring, such as windscreens, lighting, and other components, to make sure that we're looking at the most modern materials and methods of installation, and also cleaning and maintenance methods as well, to maximize the useful life of that component. But we're putting forth a number of individual new approaches in order to implement or deploy this strategy. Now, you're familiar with our previous nomenclature, which involves station modernizations, station rehabs, station reconstructions, like Stillwell, Atlantic Avenue, 96th Street. We're proposing 2 new terms going forward. One being station renewals, which would be a more comprehensive project on a station, and then individual component campaigns, which would target the worst conditions, which would be a 4 or 5 rated item. And our logic is really no different than what you and I would use in our own home or apartment when we set out to do an improvement. I purchased an old house years ago that was over 60 years old. When it reached 70 years, I basically sat down with my wife and we laid out a station restoration type scope, where we decided we would change out, put new windows, doors, siding, a new roof. Well, we didn't put a new roof on, we basically reshingled. Bathroom, kitchen, painting, everything. And our intent was that would last at least for as long as we lived in the house, but that hasn't been the case. Here I sit 16 years later, and I was forced to do my own condition assessment of the house. And what did I find? I found components that I didn't address 16 years ago were now coming due. Driveway was starting to crack and break up. I'd rate that at 3.5. Normal wear and tear of kitchen cabinets, bathroom, I'd rate that at 2. Carpeting, floor surface, definitely worn from the kids running from the kitchen to the living room, I'd rate that at 3.5. But the roof that I had tried to go on the cheap and just put another layer of shingles on was now starting to blow off every time we had a nor'easter. I'd rate that a 4.5, closer to a 5, no longer functioning. So I'm faced with the same dilemma we are with the capital program. I need a second home equity loan in order to move forward a full scope of a renewal touching the items that I just mentioned. And until such time as I get that funding, I basically want to keep my house in a state of good repair. And therefore, the most critical item to me today would be the roof, the fact that I rated it a 5 and it's no longer functioning. And that's the same logic we're applying to these two approaches. A renewal, a more comprehensive scope with larger resources needed, as compared to a component campaign where we'll target those worst conditions that exist at a specific station. So let's take a typical station. You're looking at 104th Street on the Liberty Avenue line. That's the A train out in Queens, where when you look at our condition assessment database, you will find that 70% of all the components at that station are rated 3.5 or worse. Clearly one of the top stations as far as total need for attention. So what are we going to do with 104th Street? We basically now will look to resurvey it today. It's been 2 years since we did the first condition assessment. And we will look at those components that are currently assessed as being 3 or worse. And we will put together a comprehensive scope based on the conditions that exist today, using that as the starting point. There will be components like my house that still have useful life left in them, and we will not include them in the scope for the renewal. We will allow those components to continue to exist and reach their useful life. But just like my house, we will look to come in at the completion of construction and paint the station and also still do artwork as we have done previously in the station rehab projects based on the larger scope of a renewal. But the most important difference is now when the contractor has completed his work, we will not walk away completely from a station renewal. We will now look for maintenance to enter that into a maintenance program so we can sustain the investment that we've made in that station and look to get the full useful life of all the components that we do actually rehab. But we have a mixed bag of stations out there over across the 468 stations. You have an example like the picture on the left, the staircase, is located at 238th Street on the number 1 line in the Bronx. Here's a station that has less than 5% of all components rated worse than 3.5. But in particular, the staircase needs attention. You can see the metal tread delaminating and working its way out, which could create a tripping hazard. That's an item that we don't want to leave. It needs to be addressed. Not the whole station, but that staircase clearly should receive attention. On the right, you're looking at a crew that's making a repair to the platform edge. In this case, we actually have to create more of an inconvenience to the riding public in that we'll have to divert trains so that that work can take place. That effort there lends itself to the opportunity to piggyback other efforts, not just looking at the scope of components in the station, but the opportunity for maintenance to come in and blitz the station as well, and other opportunities down the line, if we are taking the whole line out, to do other work at other stations. So the component campaign is really going to focus on individual components at stations or specific pieces of a station to eliminate those worst conditions, the ones we're rating the 4s and the 5s. And we've identified 130 stations within the 468 that we should focus this campaign on. And we feel we can address them within a 5-year period and truly bring our station environment up to a relative state of good repair by not having 4s and 5s in existence in any of our stations. So we're looking to pilot a number of different approaches. I don't have all the answers yet on which will be the most cost effective, which ones will get us the biggest bang for the buck, but I'm putting forth that we need to approach it in a number of different ways, and we'll start to pilot those where we'll have specific campaigns for like the staircase example, and we have contracts underway right now that will address just staircases on the Jamaica line. At 7 stations, we'll do approximately 18 staircases and see how that works as far as eliminating the bad condition, but also seeing how cost-effective we are dealing with that. We'll also have blitzes on single stations where we'll address those 4s and 5s and have maintenance come in and remove any defects that they've identified in their database. Most importantly, we'll communicate what exactly we plan to do and the schedule we're going to lay out to do it so that we can get feedback not only from our analysis of our contractor's effort, but from the customer as well, as far as what they perceived we would accomplish and what they feel we actually did accomplish. With that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Craig to have him give you some of the specifics of how now maintenance and the maintenance program will actually dovetail with that plan. Craig?
Actually, just before Craig starts, I need to explain something. In the implementation of the line manager program, which was done in 2009, a decision was made early on that in addition to having the service delivery people, the rapid transit operations people and the stations people merged together, the decision was made that the maintenance forces, whether it be mechanical for the car equipment side or the infrastructure maintenance services, broke down by line as well. So an apportionment of those maintenance resources were assigned to each one of the line managers in the groups. And there was an awful lot of discussion at the time before that was implemented, and there were different people on different sides of that issue. In my looking at it, I have some concerns on it on two different veins, one of which is, in some cases, we have put in the hands of the line managers, who are not maintenance background people or experienced people, critical maintenance functions that you and I need to know are done every day. A critical joint track signal inspection of every switch. So you make sure the switch point faces up, you make sure the signals are properly indicating whether the switch is closed and locked, things like that, so you prevent derailments and collisions from occurring. The other issue is the deployment of resources to make sure that they're effectively being utilized. And we've had a couple of audits, and I don't mind saying it. I mean, audits will tell you things where your performance isn't that good. We've got people either not being productively employed or not employed and doing anything during certain points of the day. And in some of them, I think there was an MTA audit, and when asking the line manager about utilization of those resources, the line manager basically said, well, I'm not exactly sure how I should utilize them. So, and that's not damning of that particular line manager. We've probably assigned to someone a responsibility that they're not sure what they have to do. So we've made a decision that we're going to pull those maintenance resources away from the line manager, put them more in a centralized location for deployment, so you can deploy them where you have specific needs. But even more importantly than that, which is historically the way New York City Transit has been structured, we are separating out a station maintenance piece that will be focused on station maintenance. So it won't be in competition with those people who are responsible for right-of-way maintenance, the tunnel lighting, the tracks, et cetera. Because in prior organizations, when all things were left to their own level, the station maintenance was the last priority. And so what we're going to do here is pull those resources back from the line manager, number one, have them centrally located, and have a specific unit called station maintenance that will be in place to deal with these issues, whether they start with heavy-duty cleaning through small maintenance activities or major maintenance activities. And that's what Craig's going to talk about.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Under our present maintenance operation, we have two ways of identifying defects and initiating repairs. The first is through a regular scheduled inspection process. Our major components like platform edge, stairways, lighting, all have a regular scheduled inspection cycle, and repairs are initiated through this process. The second system we have is a trouble ticket system. This system is used by our frontline employees to identify defects and initiate their repairs through the trouble ticket system. There are these repairs are categorized in two different categories. The first one is safety and defects, and the other one is non-safety defects. Safety defects have a goal of being repaired within 24 hours. We meet 95% of this goal. About 5% falls outside the 24-hour window. And some examples of safety defects are broken handrails or a broken tile that may create a tripping hazard. Those are addressed immediately through this system. The second kind of defect, the non-safety defect, we have a 60-day goal to repair those by. And here we have a significant backlog. At best, we meet 75% of our goal. There's several shortcomings to this approach. The first one is there's no coordination with the capital improvement program. There's no prioritization based on the fact that a capital investment has been made at that station. All stations are treated equally. Next slide. Our new approach redeploys some of our workforce to create teams of multiple trades. These teams will go out and blitz the station and remove all of the defects at once. The focus of these teams will be stations that have been previously rehabilitated. The goal here is to preserve the capital investment and improve the customer experience by enhancing the overall environment. We're going to pilot this two different ways. First, we identified the two busiest rehabilitated stations in each borough. We're going to focus first on the four of these locations. This is the next slide. Yeah. We're going to focus on. Oh, it doesn't have that. We're going to focus on four of these locations, and we're going to go in, blitz the station, and reach out to our customer to see to validate this approach. And we're going to fine-tune our approach with our budget, with our schedule, and the mix of trades for the various station types. We will also be piloting this approach with the component work. We're looking to develop a complement to the component work. We will not, every opportunity where component work is being done will not present itself as, to lend itself to this approach. When we're going in, staging general orders, or when we have a significant number of components that are being addressed, we will apply this approach, go in, send our maintenance forces out, eliminate the defects, and move forward. We're also initiating a maintenance management program where these stations that receive these treatments will go into the maintenance management program. The goal here is to prevent the accumulation and backlog of defects as we have right now. Ultimately, the stations that will go into the maintenance management program will be the newly rehabilitated and renewed stations, stations which we had rehabilitated in the last 10 years, and we send our maintenance forces out and eliminate the defects. They will go into the program. And stations that receive the component investment along with the dovetailing of the approach, of the maintenance approach and eliminating the defects, they will also go into the program. Fred?
Thanks, Greg. As we roll out this new strategy with renewals and component campaigns going forward, I just want to remind you that we still have a very extensive station program in construction underway from the funds from the 05-09, where we have 37 stations under construction as we speak, which will continue to be brought to completion over the course of the next 2 years. In addition to that, our ADA program continues. As you know, we have the commitment of 100 key stations to be completed by 2020. I'm happy to report we're well on our way there. We've achieved 70 to date, which is 3 more than we expected to be at this point in time, with 11 ADA stations in construction, 8 more in design, and 11 that will be completed in the following capital program, which will be 15 through 19. So in summary, basically, we are looking to combine strategies going forward using both capital and operating resources. We'll be targeting repairs based on the worst conditions in the system as being given priority. We'll look to do a better job of maintaining those capital investments by the focused maintenance plan that Craig spoke to. We'll be looking to do pilots in order to better assess how well we're doing on a number of different approaches so we can adjust accordingly and achieve a more sustainable approach for the latter years of the 5-year program. And conduct surveys to evaluate how the customers are actually responding to our efforts using these various approaches. That concludes our presentation.
Thank you. I don't know if there are questions for Tom, Fred, or Craig.
What will happen? I think it's on. Yeah. What will happen as you go along, and a new 4 or 5 becomes apparent?
Our baseline was set on the condition assessment that we did 2 years ago. We started that in '07. We completed in '08. In order for this to continue, we'll need to conduct similar type assessments system-wide across all stations. We figure about every 5 years. So it gives us time to get the data before we would submit the following capital program. And then we'll have current information every 5 years as to new conditions that rose from 3 possibly to 4. So again, we can establish priorities for each capital program based on the needs, the worst conditions that exist throughout the universe of stations.
In addition to that, we can't just wait for surveys. We are leaving the line manager program in place.
Right.
So we are going to have a line manager and a group manager. They're going to be responsible for that customer experience in the stations and when the service is being delivered. So for argument's sake, whoever the line manager here is at Grand Central, if they see a 4 or 5 defect arise, they can report it to station maintenance, and station maintenance, if it's a 4 or 5, it's going to have to be acted on. It'll probably be a safety defect,
Right.
and so it'll be restored in 24 hours. I mean, there's a couple pieces of the presentation that we didn't elaborate on, and it may be worthwhile to elaborate. There's all different kinds of cleaning that is done in a station. The initial part of cleaning is the scrapping of the refuse and the newspapers and the things that reside in the station, as well as the graffiti removal for the spot graffiti. And that's the first layer of cleaning. Then there's, for tiled surfaces, we have a mechanical floor scrubber that you've probably seen at some of those stations. Then the next level of cleaning is by one of our mobile wash vehicles, which generally sits up at the street, hooks up to a fire hydrant. It has ability for high-pressure hot water, so you can do a much higher level of intensity cleaning. And we've actually asked the station maintenance folks in this new element that we're creating to create levels of that, because I believe one level is like every 60 days for certain size complexes, and we may even go to another level, bigger scope of cleaning every quarter, for example. I mean, if you walk through a major station complex, there's a lot of areas that haven't been cleaned in decades. I mean, you'll see the top of light fixtures, you'll see cable raceways, and you'll see literally that much dirt sitting on top of it. We need to come through and clean those every once in a while. And we haven't specified the periodicity to what it's going to be, but we need to figure out what level of frequency cleaning we have to keep them relatively clean. But we want to keep those elements of the line manager program that keep the focus on defects as they occur in stations.
Because there's obviously two different aspects of this. There's one aspect which is catch-up. What is there already that has been surveyed that we now have to catch up on? But unfortunately, time does not stand still, neither do stations. So tomorrow, something that's not on your list will happen.
Right.
It's guaranteed.
Right.
So, and it's not a question of not knowing it's going to happen. It just happens. Some, ceiling thing falls down or whatever it happens to be. So therefore, the question to the customer is not just what we had in the past, but how quickly is that now remedied within the context of the new program, so that they see not only that you've been there once, but that you're there more than once as necessary, as things happen in stations. I think those are the two clear components that you're trying to get at, that I think from the customer's standpoint, that's what they want. They want to know that somebody is watching, and then somebody is fixing whatever is watching.
Right.
In that regard.
We're actually applying the same logic we used for when we actually removed graffiti from the trains, which was line by line, we identified a line and said we're going to meet this new standard. So the 4s and 5s need to get dealt with on a day in, day out basis because they're safety critical.
Right.
But for the 1s, 2s, and 3s, we're going to couple those together either into a component program or a renewal program, work those backlogs off. But once we work them off at a station, that station enters the maintenance management program, so it's held to the higher standard. What we probably did in the past is we waited for a rehabilitation or a renewal on a grand scale to occur,
Right.
and the maintenance resources were shotguns scattered across the entire system. So you didn't see, there were repairs going on, but not necessarily enough that you could see the difference in terms of the effect. So if you focus it, because the question was asked this morning at the committee meeting, how can you do this with the limited resources you have? By laser focusing them on station by station until you get the backlogs worked off.
Well, it's not only the entire station, it's pieces of stations, which I think is the point here. Mm-hmm. We're no longer going to wait for 15 things to happen before we go in. If one thing happened or 3 things happen, those 3 things will be fixed regardless of where it is on the schedule.
Right.
That's right.
And the platform edge, is pretty important from a safety standpoint,
Right.
as you can see.
Yeah.
And I mean, what you can't see in that picture is not just the edge. If the structure behind the edge is bad, and that's what you fix the edge to, you've got to fix that structure.
Okay.
In terms of the limited resources, the personnel that you're using for this or these initiatives are existing personnel, there's no additional? That's correct. That's correct. And are we spending, when we're doing these kind of cleaning, we're taking the dirt off in 10 years, are we spending capital dollars to do that, or are we spending expense dollars? Operating dollars.
Painting, I want to see how painting fits into all of this, because you go to some station and
No, that's okay. That's okay. No, we had some engaged discussions over the last few days
well,
on
I mean,
painting.
you go into some of these stations
No.
and it looks like an art installation on the ceiling with
Yeah.
the peels coming down. It's
This-
unbelievable.
this is-
And it's water intrusion. It's a whole host of other things that cause the problem, but there's also lead paint
Right.
remediation issues and maybe asbestos. Am I allowed to say asbestos?
Here, let me
Yeah.
say it. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Somebody fed you a sheet, or you've been hanging around the subway a long time.
No, she knows. She knows.
There's no doubt about it. If you would ask anybody, if you wanted to, how do you change the appearance of any facility? Paint up, fix up, clean up, paint up, and that's what they would tell you. And we don't want to lose sight of the fact that paint does do an awful lot. Average cost to paint an entire station, out-of-face painting, $800,000. That's an average cost. If it's a complex, it would be more than that. If it was not a complex, it would be less than that. We have to treat every painting experience that we have as if it's a lead abatement, because we do have paint that is still up there. We've never, ever done an out-of-face abatement of a station and blasted all the paint off. So it has to be treated as if it's lead, so you have to encapsulate, you have to protect. And then you have the issue of, if you go to Borough Hall right today, I'm not proud of it, but if you go to Borough Hall today in Brooklyn, you'll see it painted over the platform, but you'll see over the track, not painted, and you'll see the peeling paint, because it's harder to get to that surface because you have to have a track outage. We understand the importance of painting, and we will include it as an element in the scope. We can't prescribe it today exactly what it will be, and we want it to be as much as it can be within a certain dollar value. In other words, where you're getting a return on your investment. So there was a long discussion in the course of the last few weeks, and hopefully through the conduct of the pilots, we will make an attempt in terms of stating this is the level of painting that needs to be done. We'll scope it, we'll budget it, we'll do it, and then we'll ask the public, do we get it right? And I honestly, I firmly believe this will be an iterative dialogue before we get it right. It's not going to be something we're going to hit coming out of the box. Either we'll spend too much money, won't get the return on the investment, we won't do enough and raise the public meter. So it'll be an iterative process. And generally, on the out-of-face painting, I got to tell you, it's better done by contract forces that are set up to do it and do all the abatements. The smaller scale painting we can do internally, but generally, once it gets big, it's contracted out.
I have an eye on the clock, so I don't mean. I think the key thing here is we wanted to have a frank discussion of setting out a new strategy. You should see this reflected in both our capital budget and operating budgets. And as Tom said, we're not trying to wait till we had everything tied up with a bow to come to the table and talk about it. I want to tell you how we're thinking about it. Let's see. We'll probably make some mistakes along the way, but it will be a continuing dialogue that takes place around this. And we are, and I think that there is concern about, or reasonable concern about watching the dollars as we're doing some of this. We are watching the dollars, but we have to find. That's why pilots make a lot of sense for us. They give us a relatively risk-averse way of putting our toe in the water, trying to do some of the things, see how we're using our resources without committing ourselves to saying we're doing this 468 times. So that's part of the approach that we're all thinking of. I do want to thank everyone for this, because it may not seem boiled down, but it's been an awful lot of work that everybody's been doing to try and get to this, and again, it'll be reflecting all what we're doing. I am conscious of the clock. I was wondering that you have in your book the independent engineer reports. Mike, if it's okay with you, are there questions? Otherwise, I would take them as read for you and move on to the contractor evaluation discussion. Is that okay? Do you mind? Okay. So I'd like to go on to the all-agency contractor evaluation. One of the things that I did, I think it was probably my first week that I became chairman, was I met with Barry Kluger as the Inspector General and talked about some of his observations and some of his thoughts. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was in the early stages of some of this work and raised this to me at that time. Again, this is a topic that might not have found its way to this committee, but I think it is exactly the kind of topic that we should be discussing here, and in that light, not only that we should be discussing it, but I wanted Barry to be part of this, to this discussion. I appreciate the fact that he's agreed to do it in that way. I'll let Linda kick off, and then I think Barry's going to add some, but it's a very important topic.
Right, and much like the last topic, it will be one that I think will be something that we'll have continuing discussions on as we keep reporting out on ACE to CPOC. So the other person at the table is Michael Geralds, who is the coordinator for the ACE program for headquarters and works with Ron. So let me tell you a little bit about the all-agency contractor evaluation system, because you might not know much about it. It's a system whereby we have project managers rate every capital contract of $250,000 and above on a semi-annual basis, and they're rated against a number of criteria, and the ratings can be satisfactory, marginal, or unsatisfactory, and they get an overall rating of one of those three as well. This is a uniform evaluation system that applies to both prime contractors and capital consultant contractors. And again, as I said, it's used by the project managers, and it's intended to allow for a discussion with the contractor. So if you're giving the contractor an evaluation that you're not happy with, you can discuss what you expect in terms of improved performance. And then the contractor, if they have a marginal or an unsatisfactory, has an opportunity, in fact, to improve the performance. So that's a very brief description of what ACE is about. But let's talk about its objectives, which I think when we talk about what Barry's report found, you'll find that I think we weren't meeting the objectives to the degree that we can, and that's really what this discussion is about today, is how do we use ACE more affirmatively. So the objective really of any kind of evaluation system is to make better business decisions. So if you have a contractor that's not performing well, presumably that will guide you when that contractor comes up looking for more work. And the idea of ACE is, since these evaluations are available to the family of MTA agencies, we're learning from each other. So if one agency has not a satisfactory experience, all the other agencies who are MTA agencies can learn about this and use this information to inform, again, really good decision making. We'll talk a little bit about whether that's happened or not in a minute. The other idea of ACE is to allow for greater collaboration, as I said before, with contractors, because when you, in fact, evaluate a contractor less than satisfactory, it's an opportunity for discussion, and you can tell the contractor what's not working. Presumably, the contractor can tell you what's not working, and the idea is to bring the project back into a position that everybody feels you're getting the value that we had intended to get. The other objective of ACE is, by having these evaluations, it's an opportunity to have oversight. We can report to you how well contractors are doing, what's our experience with them, are we largely working with contractors who are performing satisfactorily, and have a discussion, especially when we have projects that have problems. And it's another resource to discuss what kinds of problems we're seeing. So with those as the objectives, the Inspector General did a report on how well the system is working, and I'm not sure what the evaluation grade would be if he was giving it, but we won't go there. But in very large findings, one of the things that was found, that there's a strong reluctance to use unsatisfactory ratings. You should know, if a contractor is rated unsatisfactory and doesn't cure, that becomes the basis for significant adverse information for 3 years. So that if you want to, in fact, give a contract to somebody who has an unsat as a rating that hasn't been cured, that then has to be overcome by making a case for why, despite that, you want to move ahead. So one of the things that was found is we don't make very much use of unsat. In addition, at least one of our agencies is not timely in their submission of the ACE evaluations, which, again, since these are designed to help us quickly know how a contractor does, so if they're bidding on other work, we can be informed by the performance of that contractor. Not having these done timely keeps the other agencies from having the benefit of any one agency's knowledge. We found that the Inspector General found that we don't, in fact, evaluate subcontractors, and that's a big piece of work that happens, and we'll talk about that. And also that we don't do very many what he called post-final evaluations. So after closeout, you may be a few months down the road and something goes wrong, and there's no coming back and saying, well, we thought we were satisfactory, but now we're seeing, in fact, what is not very satisfactory performance, and we don't tend to come back and capture that in any consistent fashion. So in response to these findings, let's talk about next steps. And really, as we see this is, I sort of describe it as a wake-up call, because this is an enormously valuable tool, this ACE, and if used right, we believe it can really strengthen our ability to secure high-quality work. And the way it can do that is if we can develop a process that allows us to bring contractor performance into consideration as we're letting new contracts, and that means not just performance that's unsatisfactory, which I think there's a reluctance to use that grade since it basically becomes nearly a disbarment for 3 years, but how to use satisfactory performance to the benefit of a contractor when they want new work, how to take marginal performance into account so that if in fact a contractor has had a couple of jobs with us where they're marginal, that might not constitute significant adverse information, but certainly should constitute the kind of thing that we take into consideration if we are thinking of giving a new contract to that person versus somebody who has consistently done satisfactory performance for us. So we want to look at how to, in fact, use the full power, if you will, of the ACE system to benefit all of the MTA family of agencies as we make decisions moving forward. We, in terms of the timeliness finding, the one agency that was least timely has instituted process to fix that. We feel fairly confident that we will now get evaluations timely. In terms of consideration of post-final evaluations, we are looking at the need to do that, how often that comes up, and how we can institutionalize that kind of a process. And as to the issue of the subcontractor, I think that's one that we're going to need to come back to. My first goal is to really drive home this as a system that aids us in dealing with the performance of our prime contractors. So we'll come back to that. I don't think very many places do the kind of reporting on subcontractors that might be proposed, and we have no privity of contract with subcontractors. So it's an issue that we'll come back to, but I first want to see us using ACE as the tool for which it was primarily intended to be used. And finally, we're going to use ACE here more. As I said earlier, we're going to talk about it. The independent engineer, if they disagree with evaluations, think contractors are not performing well, but they're getting better evaluations than their performance indicates, we'll talk about it. And we'll just generally talk to you about how well our contractors are doing and our success in changing this process to really maximize the value of this tool. Thank you.
Linda, quick question for you. This information, when it's gathered, is this just between the MTA board and the contractor, or will other people will the information be available to other people? Example, bonding companies.
No. The information is contained just within a database where the procurement offices of the agencies have access. It's not public information.
Okay, because that could hurt us if that information got out,
right.
Lawsuits and future work and contractors not wanting to bid because of it.
Well, right.
Okay, you answered the question. Thank you.
And actually, to be clear, in this conversation, we won't talk about any specific contractors for just that reason in this conversation, unless we go into executive session.
Okay.
And further level of protection is this information is considered working papers, and none of it's spoilable either.
Alan?
I assume you were keeping track of, you said time. I assume that money is also also a factor there?
Yes, the criteria, schedule, management, budget, safety, they're rated.
And quality.
And quality.
And quality, okay. And so that are we keeping, aside from some kind of a numerical rating system, I guess, to do this, are there actual examples of if the job is a $30 million job and it ends up coming in at $50 million, are you able to track it by contractor?
I don't know if ACE does, but we are also creating another tool for the capital program, which will, in fact, track every project against its schedule and its budget. Does ACE actually track against budget?
What ACE can track against is I can query the system to see the number of satisfactory ratings in a specific area, like budget or like schedule. I can drill down to a specific contractor or go agency-wide or MTA-wide to see what percentage of our contractors are coming in on schedule or not.
But I think, and I want to let Barry speak. But I think one of the points that comes out of this, obviously, is there's a triangulation that has to take place between the contractor evaluation system and the performance that we're seeing in the program. And I think one of the points that's being made, and again, I think Barry will speak to this, so I'm not trying to steal his thunder, is that triangulation is not happening the way it should be happening right now. Anyway, go for it.
It's fine, and everybody can steal the thunder. I appreciate being here, and I think the fact that you've put this on the agenda from my perch as the Inspector General, who spent a lot of time working on this report, working very closely with the Office of Construction Oversight and Linda. From the day I walked into both of your offices and highlighted this problem, there was a recognition that this was an issue that had to be dealt with. That while what we found over a 2-year review of this evaluation system was very troubling. And those of you, I'm sure you all have copies of the report and have looked at it, see that there's many troubling aspects to this report. And actually, the board's issues in this area actually go back to 1988, when you first had a COPE system, and then you had a COPE system. And then this board actually, I believe in 1998, made some changes to your all-agency guidelines, where you demanded that contractor performance be greatly considered in contracts and these evaluations, and that's how ACE was born. It's unfortunate that our review has shown that many of the same problems that existed with ACE were really with some of the same problems. It wasn't the system itself. The prompts are there, the issues are all there to report it, but there seemed to be a lack of an understanding and an institutional reluctance to utilize these from the project manager all the way up. As Linda mentioned, this whole issue that if you call someone unsatisfactory, it triggers an SAI review, but that doesn't mean, nowhere in my report, if you look at it closely, am I saying specifically, if he has an unsatisfactory, you shouldn't use this contractor. The president, executive director, chairman, CEO, you, the board, have to decide. There may have been extenuating circumstances, but you need all of this information before you, the issue of internal transparency all the way up, for you to make the correct business decision, not only whether to accept this contractor or not, or if it's in the midst of performing, that across agencies you know what some of these problems are. In some of the examples that I saw, there was information that was just cut off, was not reported, even though project managers knew you were dealing with a marginal and, in many, many cases, an unsatisfactory evaluation. The raw data for the 2 years was only 19 unsatisfactory evaluations were put in out of a total of 2,500. Now, you've all been reviewing capital construction work and other contractor work, and I think it would surprise you that only 19 had an unsatisfactory rating. Yes, it's important to give these contractors an opportunity to cure. Yes, it's very important that we exercise due process in terms of these responsibility determinations, but you need accurate information going up, and you need accurate information going across. That being said, I am gratified that the vast majority of the findings and recommendations in the report were accepted, but if I could just take a couple minutes to make a pitch for a few of them that Linda mentioned are under review. One of them is post-final evaluations. Actually, I don't have to pitch it because it's already a prompt in the A system. Unfortunately, out of the 380 contracts that were evaluated, there were only 5 post-final evaluations entered into the system, and all 5 of those were satisfactory. I'm in the process of looking at those 5. I won't report on those today as to the whys and wherefores of why a post-final would be satisfactory, but that's something that we're looking at that I can report to you at a later date. My recommendation, which was accepted in principle, was that on an exception-based theory, that when an evaluation, the bricks are falling off the building is the example that we used with a contract you may be familiar with, but in any event, that should be entered as a post-final evaluation for consideration for future work or the management of that kind of work in the future. Since I issued the report, I'm probably going to try to amend that recommendation and not say that it should be exception-based, that maybe on all of our contracts, 6 months, a year down the road, and I offer this for consideration, is that post-final be done on all of our contracts, because I believe what comes before you is that many instances, it's not till months after a closeout that you recognize that there may have been a problem with that particular contractor. And I think it's very important that you have that information before you. As to the issue of subcontractor evaluations, yes, I think they were raised. While, again, that recommendation was accepted in principle, there were legitimate legal and practical concerns on just how you would do this. Lack of privity was one, concerns of some of the general counsels, concerns about lawsuits. I just have to look at this as a practical situation. 70% of your work, at least, is done by subcontractors. And for you to not have a formal evaluation system, whether it's included on ACE, whether you call it a subcontractor evaluation system, one of the fact patterns that we used in the report was you had a subcontractor that was unsatisfactory, and nobody knew about it, and then he was awarded future prime contractor contracts. So you must, I submit, that you must find a way to include, maybe put a dollar amount. I'm not saying for every $10,000 contract, but certainly you could pick a monetary amount that's consistent with your other evaluations to look at that. Now, while your lawyers have raised some concerns regarding this privity issue in due process, there happens to exist a form that deals with subcontractor supplier incident reports. So on paper, you are allegedly reviewing subcontractor evaluations. Unfortunately, in the last 5 years, not one has been filled out. Even though Audit Services did an audit 3 years ago, there were recommendations to CPM that they utilize this function and fill these out for the reasons, some of which that I've articulated here. That recommendation was accepted, and to date, there has still not been one of those subcontractor evaluations. I also want to mention one other area. I know you're short for time, but I did recommend a change to your all agency guidelines in terms of what constitutes SAI, to make sure that you have this internal transparency, and that if you have a pattern of marginal and or unsatisfactory evaluations during the life of a contract, that be considered significant adverse information, and that just because somebody cures it at the 11th hour, all that information falls off the table. Once again, that doesn't mean that you still may decide because of the improvement to select that contractor, but if you select that contractor, you have a body of information available to you that you can manage that contract. So someone at another agency or within the agency knows what the problems were when that contractor was working on a previous contract. There are other issues here, but I would just say that I'm very pleased that these issues that we've raised have been taken seriously, and I pledge our further cooperation and assistance as we continue to review this and you move toward implementation of the recommendations.
It strikes me that the issue here is not so much the requirements of the system as getting the people with the working relationships with your contractors to believe that the system is actually of some value and the headache of filling in the boxes is worthwhile. And I mean, this thing of the unsatisfactory, it's a very direct value judgment, and people just are frequently unwilling to check off the box. I mean, is there some other way of defining that category? I mean, sort of did the work they do actually did the product serve, or did the bricks fall off the wall? I mean, there must be a way of objectively asking whether the product had a reasonable level of the value you were looking for without necessarily using the word unsatisfactory. I wonder if that wouldn't get you down the road a bit, just for one.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that one of the things that the idea of sort of making marginals have significance is sort of was also how do you look at things that people are less reluctant to say. I think what you've suggested is another approach, and that we should consider it, because it's exactly right. I think people are very reluctant to check that box and feel very exposed when that's the worst, and it has such remarkable consequences in their minds.
I guess I would just further add, I think that the likelihood of, if you really work this system and it becomes a substantive part of how you do business, the likelihood of this information remaining confidential in the way you're contemplating is, I would say, virtually zero. So that to the extent you can be less value-laden and more objective statement, I think you're going to be better off.
I mean, to some degree, I would agree with my colleague. To some degree, it's like giving people a reference. When you get a call to give somebody a reference, you're very reluctant to say something, so you put in code words, or you go only to a point and you're concerned about liability or whatever it is. But from a procedural standpoint, the ability, I mean, I agree with you 100% on the subcontractor issue. I don't think there's any privity issues at all, because in reality, the satisfactory or unsatisfactory nature of the project for the contractor, in our opinion, depends on whether the subcontractor did the right job or not. Because if the response can't be, well, you got an unsatisfactory to the contractor, and his response is, well, don't blame me, it was him. Well, I hired him, okay? And MTA, I assume, gave the contractor the ability to hire the subcontractor. So in reality, that ability to do that comes from MTA. The question I was going to ask, is it a requirement on any contract that we award, either capital or procurement, that the system, that the awarding agency go through the system to find out whether there is any adverse information?
Yes, the procurement offices are required to consult ACE before making a procurement.
So the issue is not that they didn't look at it. The issue was the information wasn't there for them to make an informed decision as looking at it, under the assumption they already looked at it in that context.
I hesitate to say this, but ACE as a structure is an excellent system.
Right.
But you'd almost be better without it, in terms that you have reliance. You have reliance on the part of some agencies when they check this, when you have across-the-board satisfactory on many of these evaluations, yet you have an independent engineer report in the file in many instances that says they're unsatisfactory.
Right.
Or you had a project manager, project supervisor, telling the project manager, I know you're saying it's unsatisfactory, but among some of the reasons that Mr. Page gave, other reasons, the project managers were very vocal to us. It was very interesting. Usually when an IG comes calling to speak to people, they'd be trying to hide. Right. Everybody was very open. The project managers were very open about the fact, we don't want to give them unsatisfactory, we'll shrink the bidding pool. Not true. we don't want to give them an unsatisfactory rating because that means we can't give them the contract. Not necessarily true. It's too much paperwork. And all the way down the line, everybody was admitting that this is what was being done, and you had a system that of 2,500 contracts with 2,475 satisfactory ratings.
And the other problem, of course, is that not only does the procurement agent or the awarding agency rely on the system, we do. Okay? Because in reality, we, the collective we, the people sitting around this table, are the fiduciary responsibility for making sure that the person who gets the contract or the product or whatever it is meets the criteria that we want to meet. And if the awarding agency doesn't have that information and doesn't give it to us, we are actually awarding contracts without doing what I would consider to be the absolute amount of due diligence necessary to make it happen.
I've spoken to this issue we're on performance today, not integrity.
Right.
But I've spoken to this issue with some board members in the past, and some of you. I discussed this, that I feel in terms of responsibility determinations, I don't feel that all the information that you receive in those staff summaries is complete on some of these issues. And I believe it's certainly on performance, and I've raised the issue that I don't think you see all the information regarding integrity either.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to, just in the interest of time, cut discussion. We have need to enter into an executive session if we can have a motion to do that. Thank you. And Barry, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.